You know about queens who were executed. You've heard of queens who were divorced. But what if I told you about a queen so intelligent, so ruthless, and so utterly terrified her own son had to wall her up in a castle for the last 30 years of her life just to keep her from seizing power again? Forget Anne Boleyn. Forget Catherine the Great. You are about to meet the original she-wolf, Queen Isabella of France, a woman who didn't just break the rules. She rewrote them in blood. This is a story of a humiliated teenage bride who became a military conqueror, who invaded her own husband's kingdom, overthrew him in a coup, and allegedly had him murdered in one of the most brutal and horrific ways imaginable. This is the history your textbooks were too terrified to tell you. The humiliation that forged a monster. When Isabella of France arrived in England in 1308, she was just 12 years old, married to the new king, Edward II. She was celebrated as one of the most beautiful women in Europe, but her fairy tale quickly turned into a living nightmare. Her husband, King Edward II, openly despised her. He showered his attention, his gifts, and the kingdom's money on his male favorite, a knight named Piers Gaveston. At her own coronation, Edward ignored his child bride and sat with Gaveston, who was wearing the queen's own jewels that Edward had given him. Imagine the humiliation. A queen in a foreign land, publicly shamed, her power meaningless, treated as nothing more than a political baby-maker. For years, she endured it. She played the part of the dutiful wife, even bearing Edward for children. But beneath the surface, a cold, calculating rage was building. She was learning, watching, and waiting. The king and his court had mistaken her patience for weakness. They were about to find out how catastrophically wrong they were. A revenge served ice cold. After years of being sidelined, Isabella found her own power player, a disgruntled English nobleman named Roger Mortimer. He was ambitious, ruthless, and just like her, he hated the king's new favorite, Hugh Despenser. Their connection wasn't just political, it was electric. They became lovers, and together, they plotted a revenge so savage it would become legend. Isabella convinced her foolish husband to send her to France on a diplomatic mission. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Once on the continent, she refused to return. She gathered an army, with Mortimer as her commander, and prepared to do the unthinkable, invade her own husband's kingdom. But before she left, she sent a chilling message. She publicly declared that she was a woman abandoned, forced to wear black as if she were a widow. It was a declaration of war. She wasn't coming back as a wife. She was coming back as a conqueror. The she-wolf's invasion. In 1326, Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer landed on the shores of England with a small mercenary army. But they didn't need a huge force because the people hated King Edward and his corrupt favorites. The country rose up to support her. Nobles flocked to her banner. Her invasion wasn't a battle. It was a revolution. King Edward's regime crumbled in weeks. He and his favorite, Despenser, were captured while trying to flee. And now, Isabella's vengeance was unleashed. She didn't just execute Hugh Despenser. She made a horrific public spectacle of him. He was stripped naked, and the Bible verses he was accused of perverting were scrawled onto his skin. He was dragged to the streets, publicly hanged, cut down while still alive, and then, in front of a cheering crowd, his genitals were sliced off and burned before his eyes. Finally, he was disemboweled. This wasn't justice. This was a statement. This was the she-wolf showing everyone what happened to those who crossed her. The king's horrifying end. With his lover gone, King Edward II was forced to abdicate his throne in favor of his and Isabella's teenage son. Isabella and her lover, Mortimer, would rule as regents. But what to do with a deposed king? Leaving him alive was a risk. What happened next is still debated by historians, but the legend that grew from it is one of the most horrifying in royal history. According to the story, assassins were sent to Berkeley Castle, where Edward was imprisoned. To avoid marking the body and making it look like murder, they devised a demonic plan. The legend says they pinned the king down and forced a red-hot poker into his anus, burning him to death from the inside out. A murder so brutal, so symbolic, and so terrifying, it was said his screams could be heard for miles around the castle. Whether it's true or not, it's the story that defined Isabella's rule. A queen so ruthless she would kill her own husband in the most unspeakable way imaginable. walled up alive. For 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England like their own personal kingdom. They were the ultimate power couple, dripping in wealth and authority. But Isabella had forgotten one thing: her own son, the young King Edward III. He had watched his mother's bloody rise to power. He saw her parade her lover around court while his father was murdered, and he was terrified of her. In a dramatic nighttime coup, the young king and his loyal knights stormed Nottingham Castle through a secret passage. They seized Roger Mortimer right in front of Isabella, despite her screaming, "Fair son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer." It was no use. Mortimer was executed, and Isabella's reign of terror was over. But what could Edward III do with his own mother? Executing her was unthinkable. Exiling her was too risky. She had already proven she could raise an army from abroad, so he chose a unique fate. Queen Isabella, the she-wolf, was placed under permanent house arrest at Castle Rising. She was, for all intents and purposes, walled up alive. For nearly 30 years, the most dangerous woman in Europe lived in forced retirement, a prisoner of the very son she had placed on the throne. Her power, her ambition, and her rage were finally contained within stone walls, a living testament to the fact that absolute power, when wielded so brutally, can lead to a prison of one's own making. If these dark royal secrets make you question everything you thought you knew about history, hit that subscribe button, because there are so many more horrifying truths that the textbooks conveniently left out. And trust me, you haven't heard anything yet.